Happy Pride season, y'all! So if you've been following my journey, you know that a few months ago, I left my queer utopia land project out in Northern California, surrounded by beautiful, radiant, radical queer folks, to move back to the Midwest. I ended up in a small city in Kansas. What nobody told me at the time is that Kansas is more conservative of a state than my original home state of Nebraska. I did not know that until I arrived, just in the time for this very intense legislative session that has been playing out this year. If you are following anything queer related, you are well aware that there are all kinds of bills popping up in the legislatures across the country right now, targeting drag shows, targeting trans people, targeting trans youth. I'm not sure it has ever been incredibly easy to be a queer or trans person in this country, but this year especially has felt intense. It has been a brutal shift for me at times, again, to just like come from this space where radical queerness and the sacredness of queerness and, you know, authenticity, vulnerability, radical forms of expression are embraced, to come to the Midwest, which, you know, like I knew a bit of what to expect to because I'm from here. I find it to be a culture that is a lot more focused on heteronormativity than West or East Coast cultures tend to be. There seems to be a real predominant energy in the Midwest that I've felt and experienced, at least, of like prioritizing sameness, that whole Midwestern nice thing where you don't really say how you're feeling, but you present in a way so as to be perceived by other people as like nice, polite, a good person, a good citizen, all those things we've been socialized to think of, which excludes queerness, which excludes radical expression, which excludes authentic embracing of our vulnerability and our emotional experiences. Like, I experienced a lot of masking in my growing up. That's what I was taught and socialized to do, was to just sort of mask what I was really feeling and how I truly felt about myself in order to present as normal, in order to present in a way that would that made me feel like I fit into my surroundings, even though like I never really fit in. I want to be clear that I chose this. Like, I chose to come back to the Midwest. I knew that that was the culture I was going to be re-entering. Like, I knew what I was getting into coming back here. I knew what I was losing by leaving California, and especially the radical fairy spaces that I encountered while I was there. A big part of that is because I have a real calling to like bring this radicalness, bring this energy, bring this authentic self-expression into places like the Midwest where it's so needed. So when I chose to come to this city, I knew it was one of the more LGBTQ friendly areas in Kansas. I guess I didn't realize what a low bar that was. And, you know, this isn't just about Kansas, the state. Like, this is true for a lot of areas in the Midwest. This was certainly true from my hometown, my home state of Nebraska, although I'm from Omaha, and that's like a little bit of a different cultural bubble within like a broader Red Sea. I know it's way worse in southern states. Tennessee and Texas in particular are real tough places to be queer right now. There's a lot of legislative attack going on. But it's been a shock for me. It has honestly been a bit of a culture shock for me, stepping back into the Midwest at this particular point in time when we're seeing this targeting of queer people, this targeting of trans people really be exploited by politicians. Looking at politics from like a humanistic standpoint, or even more so like a nature-centric standpoint, so much of these political games that we see playing are about targeting difference, are about targeting the other, are about enforcing normality and the way that we're all supposed to be per colonialism, per capitalism, per our socialization in this country that is rooted in white supremacy and heteronormativity and all kinds of other things, patriarchy. We've seen this pattern for years of a marginalized group is targeted by politicians, is targeted by political movements on a national level, and that's where all of the focus of the country ends up going. And right now, so much of that focus is on queer and trans people. When we stay distracted by targeting one marginalized group of people, when our political culture, when our society keeps us distracted by telling us to focus on like what's happening here, drag queens are reading to your children, trans people are indoctrinating other people. It's a real convenient way to scapegoat a marginalized population. It's a real convenient way to scapegoat a group of people who don't have the power, who don't have the political resources to fight back, so that nobody else pays attention to other political issues that are happening. Nobody else pays attention to the fact that our economy is struggling. Nobody else pays attention to the fact that none of us are happy in this culture and society. None of us pay attention to that the 9-to-5 work week is failing us. Like, none of us pay attention to these bigger social issues, these bigger cultural considerations, concerns, when we're being told to target a minority group, when we're being told to target a marginalized group, when the conversation is so focused on one specific tiny group of people, we fail to see the collective ways that this society is failing all of us, is letting all of us down. It's a convenient way to distract from bigger social concerns. It's a convenient way to get people to rally around an issue. And it comes at the cost of whatever that group is that's being targeted. This is the whole issue with the us versus them mentality. When we hold these mentalities that some other group of people is not like us, is not okay, is not good, is bad, we need to focus on and change this other group of people. When that's our focus, is it's us versus them, we stay stuck. We stay stuck as a society. We remain unable to grow. We remain unable to address the bigger social issues that are keeping us in these positions of oppression. It's not queer people's fault that the economy is failing. It's not queer people's fault that capitalism as an institution doesn't work. It's not queer people's fault that, mental health issues are skyrocketing because we've created a culture that fosters unhappiness. Queer people have nothing to do with that. In fact, queerness is an antidote to some of that. And yet we have this national level conversation fixating us on, should queer people be able to use the bathroom? Should queer people be able to interact with children? We have these national level conversations that are distracting us, focusing on these tiny little pieces that really don't friggin' matter. Ooh, so all that to say, it's been an interesting time to come here. What I have found is that people have been exceptionally friendly to me. I don't know that I read as queer enough on the streets for people to necessarily know. My van is certainly queer. My home is queer and getting queerer. I found that people are very nice and have been very personally welcoming to me. I found that I feel like a lot safer and comfortable in expressing who I am here than I even kind of expected to feel. And yet still, I know that this is like an underground conversation that's consistently happening. One of my friends here is a teacher at the elementary level and has noticed that kids are going back in the closet. This person has said that every year he's taught, he's had at least one kiddo identify as non-binary or transgender, and this is the first year that he hasn't. So these underground ripples really do play out in influencing culture and influencing the ways that people feel free to be themselves. And this is why it was so heartening for me and exciting for me to attend my first Pride event of the year here in my new little city. It's the smallest Pride gathering I've ever gone to. I wasn't even really sure what to expect. The fact that they even have a Pride gathering here is really incredible to me. And I think I really needed it. I've been here for, November, December, January. I've been here for about 6 months. And again, I went from this space of having giant queer gatherings of 30 to 100 incredibly radical, gender diverse, all forms of expression, queer people. I went from having that, at least every couple months. And even when we weren't having gatherings, I was just constantly surrounded by people who were queer, by people who understood and looked at the world from the same lens that I do in terms of heteronormativity and the ways that gender socializes us in really deeply problematic ways. It's been 6 months, and that feels like a really long time to have gone without feeling like a queer connection. I'm just starting to dip my toes into the queer community in this city, but it's a slow process, and it's not like queer spaces just are not as easy to plug into here in Kansas and the Midwest as they are in spaces like California, especially because I was so close to San Francisco. So it really fed something like deep in my soul and my spirit to be around so many people who are expressing radically and celebrating their queerness in this little pride celebration this last weekend. There were about 1,000 people. It was a big deal to me too, because I saw my first contestant from RuPaul's Drag Race. We had one of the contestants from RuPaul's Drag Race come. It was so touching to see all the speeches and this drag queen who came too, Cameron Michaels. You know, this is somebody who is a celebrity status, like was a contestant on RuPaul's Drag Race, did not have to make a choice to come to this small city in Kansas. And yet she did, and she spoke about the reason why she did that is because she too is from a rural town. She too grew up in an area where she was different, and she had to figure out how to survive that. And, you know, now she's on the other side of being a drag queen as her full-time profession, and having people know her and recognize her and be able to use the notoriety that RuPaul's Drag Race, that the show RuPaul's Drag Race provides to queer people and drag queens. That show has done so much to legitimize the art form of drag and to present it on a national level so that queer people who are expressing in that way can do so freely. So, you know, at a time when we're seeing bans against drag performances, at a time when we're seeing specifically targeted attacks against trans children, trans youth, trans adults, it really showed me the power of like coming together even in a small space. And the messages of inspiration that day of looking at the togetherness that we have here, looking at, you know, there were like, I want to say well over 1,000 people who attended this Pride event, you know, being able to look around and seeing all the faces of the people who live in this area, who feel this way, who are queer, who are walking this journey, to be able to see how not alone we are. Gosh, we needed that. Gosh, I needed that. It comes so much down to authentic self-expression. And that is something that has been targeted by our government. That is something that has been targeted by policies. That is something that has been targeted by our culture since the origins of this country, because they knew that within our authenticity lies power. Within our full self-expression lies power. In these spaces, we're no longer content to show up and jump through the hoops of a culture that doesn't support us. In these spaces, we're no longer willing to tolerate heteronormative messages that constrain who we truly are. In this space, we see that within our authenticity, within our vulnerability, there's connection that lives there for us. There's ways of connecting to other people. We don't have to be alone in the ways that we feel. This small town pride to me felt like a rallying cry around that. It felt like a rallying cry of, we are here, we are visible, we will not be squashed out. There is no law that can be passed that will eradicate queerness. There is no law that can be passed that will eradicate transness. There is no law that can be passed that will eradicate authenticity and radical self-expression. Those are central to the human experience. Those are central to the natural experience. Look around at the world, y'all. Nature is queer. Nature doesn't follow the rules. Nature isn't heteronormative. These efforts to perpetuate heteronormativity, these efforts to legislate heteronormativity are not going to work, because you can't do that. You can't undo nature. You can't undo what already is. And the damage it does in the meantime is to individuals. It pushes young people back in the closets. It makes adults afraid to go out of their house. It makes all of us a little bit more afraid to more authentically self-express. But when we have these challenges, they do show us how important it is for us to come together. When we are faced with this level of oppression, it is an opportunity for us to stand together and confront it and show everybody else who feels the way that we do that we are not alone, that you are not alone. That while there are people who maintain political control in this country who would like to eradicate queerness, who would like to squash out our identities and our existences, it's simply not possible. They can push us back in the closet for a little bit, but it's simply not possible to eradicate. And when we choose not to go back in our closets, There's some risk with that, and we have to make those choices individually and what's best for us and our families and our loved ones. And there is also power there. There is also power there. There is power in being visible. There is power in showing up when we've been told not to. There's power in standing together. It makes me think of recently Lizzo did a concert in, I believe, Tennessee, where drag queens have officially been banned from performing in public spaces. And she brought a whole bunch of drag queens from RuPaul's Drag Race. She brought a whole bunch of local queens with her. She brought them up on the stage, and she talked about how people had told her not to come, to cancel that concert, to not go to that state because of the bills that had been passed. And she said, why would I not go where this message is needed the most?
In light of recent and tragic events and current events, I was told by people on the internet, cancel your shows in Tennessee, don't go to Tennessee. And you don't have to do that personally. Their reason was valid. But why would I not come to the people who need to hear this message the most? The people who need to feel this release the most? Why would I not create a safe space in Tennessee where we can celebrate drag entertainers and celebrate our differences and celebrate fat black women?
Where people need most to see authenticity is in these spaces, is in the Midwest, is in the South, is in all of these rural areas, is in the cities that are facing these drag and transgender bans. These are the areas where it's most critical for us to band together, to stand up. And I felt that this weekend. I felt that at our little Pride gathering. There were so many children, so many young people, so many incredible performers and performances, so many meaningful speeches about the impact of togetherness and reminding us to not pay attention to the news, to look around instead and see how supported we are, see how together we are, see how not alone we are in our expressions. You know, regardless of your own personal feelings, regardless of all these stories and reasons that are being thrown around to target these queer populations, what I can say for a fact is anything that supports our radical authenticity is necessary. It brings us closer to a culture that we actually want to live in. It brings us closer to a culture where people don't choose death over existence. And I say that about queer people, and I say that about non-queer people too. What queerness wants for us is to celebrate who we are. What queerness wants for us is to celebrate our differences and recognize that there are strengths within them and that it makes us special and it makes us interesting and it makes life exciting. It makes the world more colorful when we can be different, when we can embrace our radical authenticity, when we can embrace our radicalness, when we don't have to fit those same cookie cutter lines. Like, nobody wins in that game. Nobody wants to fit into a cookie cutter design. That's not good for any of us. And what I hope to see coming out of these legislative attacks, and I'm not saying this is a short-term thing. I don't think we're done with targeted political attacks against queerness by any means. I think that's something that's going to continue for several more years. But what I hope and believe will come out of this is that same banding together experience that I felt as we were all walking the parade together, as we were all watching performances together. It's an opportunity to come together. When we've been told we shouldn't, when we've been told to distance ourselves, when we've been told to other somebody else, it is an opportunity for us to come together. It is an opportunity for us to show up and show out and recognize, wow, there's strength here. If they're telling us not to do this, there must be strength here. My fellow queer people, straight people as well, it is so, so, so important for us to stand together. It is so, so, so important for us to show up in the ways that we can be radically authentic and to do so. We all need that. Queer people need that from you, trans kids need that from you, drag queens need that from you, and straight people need that from you too. We all need a culture of authenticity. We all need that. We all need spaces where we can be as we are without having to fit these cookie cutter molds. This is an opportunity for us to stand together and do that. When we see these targeted attacks, it is an opportunity for us to recognize the larger narrative playing out, that it's not actually about queerness, it's about distraction, it's about targeting an other. And how can we show up and reassure, especially the kids, especially the youth, that there's nothing wrong with them, that they're supported, that they have family, that they have resources to turn to, that there are others who are standing with them. This is an opportunity. So as we enter Pride season this year, I encourage you to show up, to show out, to not let these legislative attacks and the public messaging that we're receiving right now limit our expression, to go for yourself, to go for the people you love, to go for the young people, to show up, to stand together, to experience that feeling of collectiveness, to recognize that when one of us is oppressed, we all are oppressed. This Pride season is calling for some extra responsibility from us. And yet, we also can't forget that Pride is a celebration, that Pride is a party, that Pride is for fun, and that the purpose of this too, the purpose of queerness, the purpose of authentic self-expression, the purpose of being who we truly are is to feel good, is to have fun, is to enjoy this life that we have, to paint it with color, to not have to have everything be black and white, yes or no, right or wrong, good or bad. That's not the way the world actually works. That's not the reality that actually exists. So I invite you to show up with your flags, show up with your hearts, show up with your spirit, show up with your passion, show yourself, show me, show us, show the kids that we are not alone, that we are not alone. There are so many of us. We're going to move through this. We are not going to go back in the closets, and we're going to stand loud and proud together because we recognize that queerness is a gift for us. Queerness is a gift for everybody. Queerness is an antidote to patriarchy. Queerness is an antidote to heteronormativity. When we embrace queerness, everybody wins. Authentic self-expression wins. The ability to live outside the lines, to live beyond the edges of the box that we've been placed within, lives. Fun lives. Color and adventure and silliness and play. It can feel like a hard time to be queer right now. I also think it's a really beautiful time to be queer right now. And especially those of us who have other forms of privilege, who have the privilege of whiteness, who have the privilege of financial resources, who have the privilege of social capital, who have the privilege of letters behind our names. It's especially important for us to be out there right now. Not everybody can choose to be open, loud, and proud. We all face differing levels of safety concerns dependent upon our numerous intersectional identities. So if you can, as much as you can, get out there. Be loud, be proud, celebrate this friggin' Pride season. Because we're only gonna do this together. And when we stand together, we are a freaking force. So get weird, get queer, get radical, whatever you feel called to do. I am sending a lot of love and rainbow hugs to you and wishing you such a happy Pride season.